If you're writing a research paper and you're quoting and citing sources, you're doing the right thing. Unfortunately, if you're not careful though, those quotes can actually leave your reader bored, confused, and if they happen to be your instructor, giving you a lower grade. But with a few easy techniques, you can use those quotes to write better papers in less time. Step 1, context. You have to read the sources you're quoting from. This may sound obvious, but you'd be amazed how often students don't actually understand a source. They skimmed it for quotes. So the writer understands the quote, but without proper context, they misrepresent it. So someone might write, Wallace rails against the consumer's impact on the environment. I can spend time in the end of the day traffic being disgusted about all the huge, stupid lane-blocking SUVs and Hummers and V12 pickup trucks burning their wasteful, selfish 40-gallon tanks of gas, and I can dwell on the fact that the patriotic or religious bumper stickers always seem to be on the biggest, most disgustingly selfish vehicles driven by the ugliest, most inconsiderate and aggressive drivers. But if the reader knows that very famous speech, then they might know that Wallace goes on to tell us that this quote is an example of how not to think. Without context, it's impossible to know if the source is being sarcastic, using a counter-argument, or just plain wrong. So read your sources. Technique 2, introduction. Next up, we have introducing quotes.
Notice what a lame beginning the "there is" formula provides for a sentence. The perfect opening formula for a laundry list. Guaranteed monotony. There is a good deal of circumstantial evidence in support of this scheme. Da-da-dum, da-da-dum, and so on to slumberland.
See how jarring that was, having another voice suddenly enter the conversation? As the writer, I know who that was. But you, as the reader, or viewer in this instance, might not. So the writer needs to introduce that other voice, such as the legendary UCLA professor and inventor of the paramedic method for revising prose, Richard Lanham.
Da-da-dum, da-da-dum, and so on to slumberland.
As you can see, writers don't always understand how their writing comes off, and it can become quite mundane quite quickly. It works a whole lot better to let the reader know a little bit about your sources. It stands to reason you should almost never drop a quote into your paragraph and leave it as its own sentence without any form of introduction. Take the time to introduce your quotes. Number 3, keep the verb in mind. One of the easiest ways to improve a quote introduction is to pick the best action verb you can find to accurately describe your source's intent. In their landmark work on academic writing, They Say, I Say, Gerald Graff and Kathy Birkenstein admonish new writers to find a better verb than says. To do justice to the authors you cite, we recommend that when summarizing, or even when introducing a quotation, you use vivid and precise signal verbs as often as possible. Though he says or she believes will sometimes be the most appropriate language for the occasion, your text will often be more accurate and lively if you tailor your verbs to suit the precise actions you're describing. Now, I will amend this a little to point out that a couple professions, such as journalism, prefer to use says, so as to remain as impartial as possible. But for the vast majority of writers, finding a verb with more accurate action immediately improves their writing. Number 4, follow up. Once you've introduced the quote and written it out, it's time to follow it up. This can take many forms, including explaining the quote, offering your reaction to it, or placing it in the context of the larger conversation going on in your paper. Because you always want to follow up your quotes, it stands to reason that you usually don't want to end a paragraph or a paper with one. But you can certainly end things on a quote, so long as it feels like an ending and not dropping the quote in and moving on like it was never there to begin with. Now, I know all this sounds like pretty basic quote sandwich stuff, but the fact of the matter is many students know what a quote sandwich is and don't actually use it when they write. We sometimes save quotes till the very end of our papers, or we're in a rush, or we have so many great ideas that we drop the quote in and move on without thinking of it. However, when you properly introduce quotes in context with great verbs and you follow them up, it actually allows you to write a lot more meaningful words in a faster manner than if you didn't. Here's a side-by-side example, again from They Say I Say, of someone who found a great quote and the two possible ways that it might be used. In the first, the quote is just kind of dropped in there, and in the second one, all the things we've talked about in this video have been done. You'll notice that the second is much longer. You're more than welcome to pause the video and read it on your own if you'd like. But really what I'm just getting at is the second one takes up a lot more space because they have more to write about, and it reads better too. It doesn't feel like they're trying to take up space. It feels like they're trying to convey something to the reader by keeping the reader in mind, but it certainly helps you write more faster. Technique 5, break it up. As counterintuitive as it sounds, sometimes the best thing to do with a quote is to shorten it or remove part of it. Readers are often tempted to skip over long quotes, and teachers can be suspicious that long block quotes are just there to eat up space. So you're more than welcome to use long quotes, but you have to be careful and make sure that they're the right quote that you need and you're using it in the right way. And you especially need to make sure you're introducing and explaining why it's there. But you should also consider using ellipses and breaking quotes down to their essential parts and explaining them in shorter segments. If you'd like a super in-depth analysis of how to use textual evidence, there's one video right here. I also have a great video on how to learn from journalism when it comes to your everyday research paper type of writing. Thank you so much for watching.